West Australian dual Olympian and World Championship rider Scott Keach. Scott's currently based in the Northern Hemisphere, somewhere in Kentucky, USA, and he's currently setting up his top horse for hopefully a spot in the Australian showjumping team at the World Equestrian Games in September. Now, Scotto was born in Tasmania and he spent his early years in WA, and then as a young teenager, the family ended up settling in Goolwa on the south coast of South Australia. Scott, tell us a bit about when and how you got into riding and who were your early influences and maybe a bit about your first competitive horse, the one that really got you jumping.
Mum and Dad were both into horses, and we were on a sheep and cattle farm in WA, so we were sort of using horses for cattle work and sheep work, and then also Mum was instructing at the local pony club, and my father had grown up doing a little bit of show jumping and some fox hunting in Tasmania, so he was into the jumping side of things a bit. So I started riding really early, probably without any real choice in it. We were so we were sort of doing a bit of everything, sort of your classic sort of, back in those days where you did everything with your ponies and a bit of jumping, bit of dressage, bit of some novelties, some cattle work, whatever was going. Bit of polo cross, and then my first competitive jumping pony was we used to have pony jumping in Western Australia, or ponies and horses, not juniors and seniors, and so I had a 13.3 and pony that we used to do the pony jumping with, and we used to jump. The Perth show was always the highlight, and a lot of the time, the kids would end up just in sort of the jump-offs, you'd end up jumping maybe up to 130, certainly, metre 20 plus, and then some of the puissances and the sort of the jumps where sort of those height classes where you'd be jumping as high as you can. I remember it wasn't me, but we used to jump at sort of 5 feet, but some of the ponies got up to 5'6", and Stewie Cameron got up to 5'10.5" on a 13 two-hand pony. So the ponies used to jump, and that was my first influence, and my first sort of real jumping. And back then, my jumping heroes were sort of Guy Crichton and Kevin Bacon and Johnny Fay.
So in South Australia, you had very early success in the old long format 3-day event at Narracourt Young Riders. What's your best memory of competing as a young rider there?
It was the best. A couple of things. One was Narracourt at the time, even when I was in Western Australia and I hadn't evented much. Narracourt and Gawler were both very well known throughout Western Australia, so they were known throughout the country. So it was a big deal to go there. We had kids from every state. The occasion, the sense of occasion was very real and was a big deal. And you went there, and when you started the cross country in the 10-minute box, you knew you were going cross country because the fences seemed like a tough course. And then it was also very social. It was a lot of fun. It was a little bit different to, so it's a little bit more serious now. It was a lot of fun then. We were sort of all camped in the centre of town at Narracourt, the trotting track. So it was both very, very serious and also a lot of fun. And we'd have kids from all over the country, so it was a big deal.
Okay, I think the first time I met you was at Narracourt, and you had a little horse there called Oakdale Aranai, a little Connemara cross there, which memory you won Gawler on one year. But I think that the horse that most people remember you for back then would have been Trade Commissioner, who took you to a team bronze at the 86 World Championships and the Seoul Olympics in 88 as an eventer. And at about that time, around the time of the Seoul Olympics, you spent some time riding in the UK. And then you went over and worked for Bruce Davidson in Pennsylvania. How did those two experiences shape you as a horseman?
The English experience was a little bit more casual, and it was sort of almost happened by accident. And I was very lucky. I rode for a guy called Brindley Powell, who had a bit of show jumping influence as well. He actually used to be a show jump rider who had got into eventing. So he was there was a little bit of training there with a bit of a show jumping bent. And then I just obviously got to see the UK scene and the level of professionalism and the numbers and the volume of horses and riders there. The US, for Bruce, Bruce was actually very generous with his help. And about a work ethic. He was a very hard worker. The Americans tend to work very hard. So it was about a work ethic, and once again, in Bruce's barn, incredible level of professionalism and the whole program, the soundness, a lot of stuff that for me was a little bit of an eye-opener on that side of it.
Okay, those connections you made at Bruce's eventually, many years later, led you back to the USA with a couple of eventing horses. Tell us about that path that took you from South Australia back to Florida, where you are now.
Really convoluted. I don't want to get too sort of drawn out and too boring, but it was very convoluted. I made 3 very good friends over there, and then through that, sort of ended up making more friends. One was a guy who's still one of my best. 2 of them are still my best friends. One's actually one of the key organisers of the WEG this year, and another one turned out to be one of the US Olympic team vets. And through them, I sort of met some other people. And then back in 2007, we had the equine flu hit Australia, and nothing was allowed to move. And you were actually instrumental in this because you suggested there was one plane getting out to go to the US, and you were pushing me to, or certainly suggesting that I get 2 spots on that plane for my horses. One was ready to do Adelaide 4-star, and then that was going to be cancelled. So we got them over to Ocala, Florida, and a really good friend of mine, Sean Wordley, who's a New Zealand guy who was in Europe for 10 years, a show jump rider, who's hopefully will be riding at the WEG this year as well. He's US based now. I just met him in the US in 2004, and he also helped me get them over there. And then as a result of getting those 2 event horses over and getting them sold at the end of 2007, Sean then sort of got into my ear and sort of suggested what I should be in the States riding. And I also saw how he rode, and he's a very, very good rider and a very good trainer. And I saw an opportunity there, so I ended up going over there for a year to see how it would go, and then decided to move there. And spent my first few years, not with Sean all the time, but certainly with Sean some of the time, sort of in the winters. And that was sort of the influence that then got me into the jumping over here as well.
Well, that was going to be my next question to you, is that you're a relatively recent convert from eventing, although you've always jumped to complement your event training. You're a relatively recent convert to pure jumping, and what was it that drove that change?
Well, I show jump before I evented when I was a kid. And so, like I said earlier, my initial riding heroes were Kevin Bacon, Guy Crichton and John Fay when I was a little kid in the 70s. So I'd always had that bent in there. And then, a couple of things just sort of switched my desires, which are sort of basically personal. And then I was very, very fortunate to get the opportunity. I ended up training a girl that evented in the States whose mother really was more into the jumping. And so there was my opportunity to actually have someone that would buy a couple of jumping horses, because jumping in the States is very expensive, so you really need people behind you. So I had this person that was wanting to do that, so I was very, very fortunate and just grabbed the opportunity.
Very good. Mate, you're on the Rio 2016 Australian jumping team. What were the highlights of that experience for you?
It was tough because of my injury and my incredibly bad preparation. I mean, the highlights were always...
Just tell us briefly what happened there, mate.
In February, we had the Nations Cup show in Ocala, which is where I live. And I had a really good show, and one of my horses was second. So it was a 4-star show. One was second in the Saturday Grand Prix, and then the other horse won the major Sunday Grand Prix. And then on the Tuesday, I was riding a horse for a stallion for a girl that I trained. And it started, it was quite odd, but I hadn't ridden it for months and months. And anyway, it ended up bucking quite a lot. And I thought I'd outridden it. And then I went to chase it forward so that it couldn't buck after I'd ridden sort of 5 bucks. And then it did a couple and surprised me. And basically I landed on the pummel, and I separated my pubic symphysis, ruptured my bladder, and completely compressed my sacroiliac joint. And basically then I couldn't walk for 10 days, and then I couldn't ride for a couple of months. June and July. And Stevie Mack and the chef, he was over in America at trial and at a 5-star show, which is the lead up to the games which we were using, and he saw me walking. So for the last 6 weeks before the Olympic Games, I didn't ride anything. I couldn't ride because I'd also then torn my groin because my pelvis wasn't working. I'd torn a whole lot of groin muscles and basically couldn't do much at all. So and my horse, I got him jumping the water jumps pretty well, but when I originally tried him, he was a little bit iffy in water, and then he'd been jumping water jumps well for 2 years at international shows. So I went to jump the water jump just before we left. The day before the horse was due to go to the plane to fly to Rio, I jumped him, and we did the one jump I was able to do. Went to jump the water jump. He pulled a shoe just as he took off, landed on his clip, couldn't put his foot down, and that was the one water jump I got to jump before I prepared for Rio. In my preparation, whereas normally I would have jumped a water jump every week for sort of 6 weeks before we left. So that was just a really, and then basically when I got down there, I rode minimally for the few days before we went into the ring, and then on the first day, over the second jump, my groin went again. It just like I felt a ping over the fence, and that was okay. I hung in there for that round, and then that was about it. It was just a very less than ideal preparation.
Was there any positives to come out of that event for you?
Oh, definitely. I mean, you're still there. You're still competing. The Olympic Games are always the Olympic Games as far as the general experience, which was always a great experience. And I still get to watch all the other good guys. And every time you go to one of those shows, unless you've been to unless you've been to hundreds of them, then it's always it gives you more experience.
Well, you've now got 6 Grand Prix horses on the go, and 5 of those you've brought up to that level yourself, which is a pretty remarkable strike rate in a very short space of time. Where do you source these horses, and what do you look for in a horse?
That's hard to describe. I've got a guy in Belgium who we trust. He's he's a young fella, but he's got a really good eye for horses. And my horses are, they're not all the same. For me, we're buying horses that are greener because we can afford to, and then I'm going to be sort of putting a year or two into them. So, hopefully the program's going to help produce the horse. You want quality, you want scope. Hopefully they're careful enough, and then after that, it basically depends on whatever package they come in.
Okay.
It very much depends on you just see something and you go, yeah, I think that's going to work.
And tell us about your current stars, and just a quick rundown on the youngsters that you're particularly excited about for the future. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the main horse at the moment, the one I took to Rio, he's jumping quite well at the moment. He's for the WEG.
That's Fedor.
Yep. He, we bought him as an 8-year-old. Pretty typical of what we do. Bought him as an 8-year-old. He was jumping metre 30s, not particularly well for the girl, and she had him as a 3-year-old. So it's one of those ideal situations where it's not in a professional's hands; it's in an amateur's hands. Hopefully, you sort of bank on the fact that you might be able to improve and get the horse going and jumping better and bigger, which was the case for him.
Scott, tell us about the other horses you've got in the stable now. I know you've got another 4 or 5 at least Grand Prix horses running. Some of them are obviously going to be future stars.
I've got 3 9-year-olds that all did their first Grand Prix during the winter. I've sort of been producing all of them for a couple of years. One was bought as a 6-year-old, and the other 2 were bought as one as a 7 and one as an 8-year-old. And I'm happy with the quality of all of them, and they all jumped quite well when they did their first Grand Prix. So we'll see how they go throughout this year, and as they keep developing. And then a 10-year-old that I've been producing for a couple of years, that he actually did some Grand Prix last year and this year. And I think as a 10-year-old now, I think he's sort of started to work out his craft.
That would be Chico, right?
Yep, that's Chico. Yep. And you actually saw him last winter, and he's done a couple of good 3-star classes, and hopefully, touch wood, I think he's ready to go for the year as a 10-year-old and sort of knows what he's up to. And also a mare that has actually sort of had a bit of a convoluted route to get to me. She wasn't going really quite so well last summer, American summer, with the guy that owned her, and I ended up getting the chance to ride her, and then a girl that I trained, her parents bought her for me, and she's proven at 160, but I had to sort of step back and slow things down with her. And I think we've hopefully done that over the winter now, and we're ready to go. And I did my first Grand Prix with her last week. Had one down, but she jumped really quite well.
And I'm right in saying that she's the mare that's by Quintero, who was the sire of Breitling, the winner of the World Cup final this year. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and she's quality horse, scope and careful, and it's all about just getting her mind right. If her mind's in good form, then she's good. Yep.
But just saying, the sport in America is huge now, with lots of CSI 5-star competitions, and I think from last count $5 million Grand Prix on the calendar, and the results for the last couple of World Cups have indicated that the standard's obviously really, really high there. What's your observations on the jumping scene in America?
It's always, Europe has incredible depth. It definitely has incredible depth. It's honking at me. I'm sorry. Europe has incredible depth. But the States obviously has some good riders, and so the standard of the highest level in the States is really high. And while there might not be quite as many of those really, really good riders or sort of well-known riders and horses, there are still plenty to make it very, very competitive here. And in the last 5 or 6 years now, the number of FEI competitions in this country it's taken off. And we have a huge number of FEI competitions throughout both the summer and the winter. So we have access to FEI just about every weekend, as well as what we used to have, which was what we call the National Grand Prix. We also have, during the winter we have some of the European guys coming in to compete at Wellington as well, that have become sort of regulars of the Wellington scene. So, while it's hard to compare the standard, it's very competitive here. And like you said, with the World Cup final, I mean, even Devon Ryan, who was second on the grey horse at the World Cup final, that horse jumps out of a colour where I am. And then with some of the other guys, you've got sort of 3 American riders in the top 10, and they can go and be competitive anywhere in the world at any stage on about 3 of their horses.
Yep.
So it's a good place as far as being able to compete against and have a good standard of riding. It's a great combination of having the standard here and also having the accessibility to the shows.
And some decent weather as well, I guess. Scott, a question.
Yeah.
Australia has just recently named you on the short list for the WEG 2018. You got your first taste of wearing the green and gold in a young rider team in Indonesia, and again with the Pony Club Trans-Tasman team to Japan back in about, 82, 83? Could you possibly have imagined back then that 36 years later you'd be where you are now? And if all goes well and you do make it to the start list, what would this experience mean to you?
Yeah, well, it's all. I mean, the first part of the question, definitely wouldn't have guessed that. And then secondly, it's been always a really, really. I think it's a really cool thing, and it's an honour to be in an Australian, to ride in an Australian team. And I'm sure like everyone else does, I'm sure they take it very, very seriously. I know that my personal experience, as I've been, would certainly do. And for me, I certainly do. It's always a great honour, and then it's just about getting on with it and trying to do the best you can, and hopefully it goes well.
Yeah, okay. And you're about to head up to the 5-star at Spruce Meadows in Canada with 3 horses. What's the preparation for WEG going to involve for you over the next 3 to 4 months?
Yeah, so we've got for North, we've got 3 5-stars, and then up there, and then there's another 5-star in Chicago. Basically, a month, 4 weeks before the WEG. And then if I needed something else, I could probably go and do something if I wanted to. But I think that should do it. 4 5-stars before the WEG should be able to prepare the horse.
And obviously you'd be riding the other horses in other competitions at the same time.
Yeah, the other 2 are the 2 9-year-olds, which are big, scopy horses. with quality, that are careful, because you really need scope in spruce. It's the courses are big, the time allowed are fast. I haven't been there yet, but I've done enough homework and spoken to enough people that's the go. So the other two I'm taking them up to help make them, to produce them, because they say that going up there is like going to Harvard, or you'd probably say over there like going to Cambridge or Oxford. In other words, they go there, they go to university, and it can really make horses if it's the right situation. So the other two are going up for experience, and they'll hopefully jump some 150s up there, but 150s up there apparently are serious. It's like the 150. They always say it's like the 150 Olympics.
Yeah, okay. Well, it sounds like that's going to be a good warm-up for WEG anyway, from what we're hearing about the potential track there. It's going to be right up to size and pretty tough.
Yeah, I mean, Alan Wade, we jump his courses a bit in the States. He always builds up the spec as far as volume goes and technicality. He builds big. Not huge, but big and square, and he doesn't apologise for it. Yeah. So, yeah. It'll be solid, especially once you get into day 3 of the WEG. It'll be really solid then.
Yeah. Well, mate, you've been in living in the States now for 10 or 11 years, and you're obviously leading a bit of a nomad life, following the seasons from Florida up to Kentucky, New York and beyond, and then back down again. Do you miss the old lifestyle back home in Oz?
I do miss aspects of it. Everywhere you go, there are pros and cons. I certainly miss the ocean. You know where I lived.
Yep.
So I miss that part for sure. I'm definitely trade-off with things about this country that are also cool, and then this is pretty good. In the winter, we're pretty well living in the one place, because the show's 8 miles away, and then Wellington's 4 hours away. We can skip up and down, so we're pretty well fixed in one spot for 6 months a year. And then here, I have a good place to base in Kentucky, and then it is a bit nomadic. We're all over the place, and that's just one of the aspects of it. But I'm not as nomadic as some of those guys in the GCT or anything like that, because they're really nomadic.
Yeah, and at least I guess at least when you're moving, you're following the sun. Scott, what's the best piece of advice that you were given as a young rider?
It's hard to say the best, but one that always stuck in my mind early was Graham Parham, who used to build Naracoorte and Gawler, and he walked the course with us kids. The very first time I went to Naracoorte, I was looked at the size of the jumps. We had about 5 of us that were all young event riders. That all were just our first time, and we're all scared as. And he said, not a problem. And he used to say, piece of cake, get your backside in the saddle and then kick if you need to. And while that sounds a little bit sort of rudimentary, it is very, very good advice.
And since then, any other pearls of wisdom you've received?
Lots, probably too many to mention. I've been lucky there. I've been lucky to have some good mentors and have some people that have been very generous with their knowledge. So then it's just an accumulation of a lot of different things. Yeah.
Any other Aussie mentors before you left here?
My first was my parents. They were very influential, and as a kid. And then I had jumping wise, George Santa was really, really generous with his help, and I have a lot of respect for him. Jamie Coman gave me a lot of help as well, and he was really generous with his help. And a couple of others that were sort of gave me a little bit, but not so much, but was still, just because I didn't spend as much time with them, were Rob Brown and Vicky Roycroft, who obviously I have a huge amount of respect for, and who, at the right time were able to still drop comments that were very helpful.
Okay. Well, the sport of show jumping is getting bigger and better back here in Oz, and there's got some really good breeding programs going on. There's some really exceptional facilities being developed here, and there's an ever-growing number of young riders entering the sport. What would you say to any home-based riders, especially these young guys who are thinking of giving it a go overseas?
Well, I mean, don't be afraid of, just sort of, you've always got to take a risk. You've nearly always got to take a risk if you want to achieve a good reward. And going overseas is a little bit part of that. As far as if you're sort of asking where to go, I think it's a great thing to see some of Europe. But for Australians, I'm a firm believer that there's much more opportunity in this country. The American psyche is to get behind people that are having a go. And there much more generous in sharing opportunity with others than I think the Europeans are, as a rule. I very, very much doubt that I would have had any of the opportunity I have in the US if I'd been to Europe. Very much doubt it.
Okay. Just to wrap this up, mate, tell us a few things about yourself that we don't know.
That's why I'm going to keep it like that. You know.
Fair enough, mate. Look, it's been great talking to you, and I wish you all the best in the rest of your preparation, and I'm really looking forward to catching up with you ringside and barracking at Wagon Tryon in about 3 3/4 months' time.
Yep, excellent, mate. Good to speak to you. Thank you very much.
Cheers.